Hey, welcome to the Road and Morale podcast. So do you ever feel like screaming out in the office, on Zoom or outside the school gates? For the love of God, come on, really? Then if this is you and you're looking for an honest, fun and frank podcast on life and business, then sit back and listen to me, Rona Morale. I'll be bringing great people on the show to talk, share and debate their life experiences and business challenges, keeping the show unpolished, but in a fun and unique British style, with sarcasm, tenacity, or maybe a few swear words or tears. This podcast keeps it real, honest, raw, and removes the bullshit in the only way I know how, through authenticity and getting shit done. Think of it less like the Housewives of New York or Towie with the lipo and drama, and more like the house lives of the real world. I hope you'll take something away to be better informed, laugh, smile, or maybe even finally getting the confidence to shout, come on really. So enjoy. Hi Alan, welcome to the Rona Morale podcast. How are you today?
Well, thank you.
Excellent. So for the listeners, I am tremendously delighted to have Allan with me here today. Allan Savory is a true pioneer in his field, but I want to tell you a little bit about Allan. So Allan was born in Zimbabwe and educated in South Africa, but started his early career as a researcher as a biologist and a game ranger, what was formerly known as Northern Rhodesia, but is now Zambia as we know it, and then later became a farmer and a game rancher in Zimbabwe. So moving forward a little bit into the 60s, Allan made a significant breakthrough in terms of understanding the cause of degradation and desertification for the world's the grassland ecosystems, and started to work in that field and dive more and more into that space. Allan then actually served as a member of parliament in the latter days of Zimbabwe's civil war. But because of your opposition and your stance, you were exiled in 1979. It was 2 years after I was born. And you immigrated to the United States, where you continue to work in land management, etc. But in 92, yourself and your wife, Jodie, formed a non-profit organisation in Zimbabwe, looking and called it the Africa Centre for Holistic Management. And both yourselves and a group of colleagues in 2009 then founded what most people know now as the Savory Institute. So I could go on and on and on, and you have won some incredible awards. And I know that in 2013, one of your TED Talks has since had 7 million views, and in 2014 was voted one of the top 50 most intriguing. So considering the number of TED Talks there are out there, that's pretty impressive. I've asked Allan to come on today because I would love, as somebody who is decades behind Allan in their work in environment and regenerative space, to talk to me and the listeners about this holistic approach, regenerative agriculture, and how people like me can just make it really simple to understand, and that difference between science, which can be quite one-way driven and viewed to as basic as kind of common sense and what's the right thing to do. So Allan, please, I would love you to start off by telling us a little bit more about holistic management and what your main passions are.
Okay, I listened to all that and you got it more or less right in my career. Except that I didn't just become a farmer rancher. You went on to it later. I went into Parliament. Essentially, I was always on the same work. When I was in the Northern Rhodesian Game Department employed by the Colonial Office, I had the delightful experience of having Sir Frank Fraser-Darling, the famous British ecologist. He stayed with me for 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I was a very ardent 20-year-old biologist, first employed by the department. And during that 6 weeks, I kept talking to him about the land degradation I was experiencing in these areas we were setting aside as future national parks. And although I was so young, I was in a very senior position as a provincial game officer, so the buck stopped with me. So I had to really manage those areas of land, and I didn't know what the hell to do.
Right.
And I was here with the world's top person, and he didn't know what to do. So really, I began switching then. This is way back in the 1950s. I began switching from being a research biologist, doing the things I would love to have done, to become the world's elephant expert, be one of the first in the field there. I loved elephants.
Yeah.
I loved falconry. I loved wildlife, and I realized that at the end of my life, if I became the world's experts in any of these fields, studying any of these species, I wouldn't have done anything to help them, to save them.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about habitat. Human habitat, wildlife habitat. If your habitat's destroyed, you are destroyed. It doesn't, nothing else matters as much as that. So I really began switching to studying our management as professional people and why we could not stop the degradation even in national parks or future national parks. So that's where it began. And funnily enough, Frank Fraser-Darling, as he was then, he wasn't knighted at that point, he one night in camp said to me, "Allan, why don't you shut up?" I was so passionate and going on day after day at him, and what are we doing about this erosion, the land damage we're seeing. And I said, FD, which is what I called him, I said, FD, I have no intention of shutting up. This is my country, this is my land, this is my life, this is the wildlife I love. I am never going to shut up. And he said, you've only got two options ahead of you. He said, you may not believe me now. And I said, what are they? And he said, well, you'll become a researcher, you'll write and publish your papers and not care with what happens to the wildlife after that. Or you'll go into politics. And I said, I will never become an academic again. I find it's an impractical field for me. And I said, I will never go into politics. I dislike those buggers. They're dishonest, blah, blah, blah. And
You've done both.
Well, he said, mark my words. And, and many years later, I was up in Scotland hawking with a falconry friend, grouse hawking. And we called on Sir Frank, as he then was, as an old man, and had tea with him. And I said, FD, do you remember a night in the Mwera when you predicted this? And he nodded. And I said, you were right. I'm now leader of the opposition in Parliament.
What a story, though. That's incredible. Was he quite humble in his "I told you so," or?
No, we just laughed and had a whiskey.
True gentleman.
Yeah. So anyway, but it began a long time ago, and from that early beginning, it's an old problem. It's thousands of years old, and we didn't have today's buzzwords like desertification, climate change, biodiversity loss. All I was seeing was massive environmental degradation, and studying that. And I long ago realized poor land means poor people, social upheaval, political unrest, war, etc.
Yeah.
So I did many things, but really I was just changing hats, and I was always on the same problem. So I became an independent scientist when I was forced to change research findings and refused to. So I faced 42 allegations against my character and dismissal in the civil service. And I fought that through a court of inquiry and was reinstated because only 2 accusations were correct. The other 40 were
out
wrong.
of 42.
So
wow.
I went through a very turbulent time, and I realized that for me, I couldn't do honest science in an institution.
Okay.
And so on. So I really became an independent scientist. When you said I was a farmer rancher, I was trying to support my family in every way I could. And then increasingly our civil war was getting worse. I was heavily involved in the army. Then I went into politics as a ecologist, thinking and discussing with American ecologists if we could just get an ecologist into Parliament, we could begin to make change. And then I became leader of the opposition, and I still couldn't make change, and I didn't understand all these things, but just kept working on the same things as a farmer, game rancher, in the army with our special forces as they were, as a politician, as an international consultant, really just being an independent scientist, trying to
Right.
keep on the same problem and find solutions, which none of us had solutions to. And then I got forced into exile just before the end of the war. And during those 4 years, I knew it was coming up. So I actually went and looked at the Channel Islands, Jersey, to
Okay.
see whether I could base up there
Yeah.
if I got forced out of the country. And I chose Cayman Islands because I would be nearer to the Americas and working there. And I did become persona non grata in the whole of Southern Africa. I
Right.
was banned from even setting foot on any university campus for over 20 years because
Wow.
of the what I was saying and the fear of academics that students would listen to me. And then I had efforts to get me deported from the United States because of the damage I was doing to the United States by talking to students and so
Mm.
on. So it was a long, hard period, but I just stuck with it, just changing hats and trying to find solutions, which finally we did. I was able to make a major breakthrough in about 1965 when I realized that we were all on the wrong path because I had actually coined the words game ranching, believing
Right.
that if we could get rid of livestock, we could manage the land under just wildlife. That had led to a terrible blunder because, like any scientist, I was seeing the data that fitted our beliefs.
Right.
I couldn't see the data that didn't fit our beliefs. So I had done the research that led to our government subsequently, after investigating my research with all the top people we could, it led to the government subsequently shooting 40,000 elephants to try to bring their numbers down, as I described in the TED talk, to
Yeah.
the level that the land could sustain. But what I found was that the land got worse, it didn't get better. Now, here we are over half a century later,
Yeah.
and not a single institution or other biologist has admitted to that. I confessed to that in the TED talk, and I got severely criticized for confessing to error, which is, you know, it's strange how we humans
So,
are. But anyway, that proved to be wrong. The game ranching movement. I did that with two American Fulbrighters, Dr. Mosman and Dr. Dasman, who were professors that came out and worked with me for 4 years in Africa. We
mm,
all thought we were right, but today that's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and every single game ranch I've looked at in Texas or Africa is still deteriorating. So in 1965, I realized that we simply had to use livestock as a tool which humans had never thought of.
yeah.
And that was like throwing a pork chop in the synagogue. I got just totally condemned and still am being.
Yeah.
So now, all these years later, you've got a whole vegan movement and billionaires and artificial meat movement, all still condemning livestock.
Mm.
But what I'd actually, not through any brilliance, but what I'd discovered by 65 was that it was simply not possible to stop what we now call desertification and the mega fires and climate change that are all feeding on each other in a spiraling feedback loop that
Yeah.
frankly is getting out of control.
Mm.
You used to hear of weather records being broken once a year or so,
Yeah.
then once a month or so. Now it's once a week or so. It's almost getting daily as
Mm.
this spirals out of control. And what I had realized is what I explained in the TED talk is that it's simply not possible for us as scientists to solve that biological problem of human habitat destruction, which it is,
Yeah.
using only technology and fire.
Right.
Now that conflicted with over 10,000 years of human beliefs. Because humans, everybody listening to this, and
Mm.
Nobel laureates, everybody believes humans have got thousands of options. There are millions of tools we can use, or thousands that we can use. No, there aren't. if you list them and you list every tool that every professional person is ever trained to use in any university in the world, you'll come up with a very long list.
Right.
Okay, but if you break that list down into categories, it'll be two.
Right.
It'll be technology in some aspect or fire. And with those two tools, you cannot address climate change or desertification. That's why it's spiraling out of control, despite all our brilliant people we have in the world. And that's a very simple discovery. But it went against thousands of years of human belief. And the only other idea we had is the one being promoted in Britain now, rewilding,
Yeah.
which is leave it to nature. Now, that occurred, that idea of using rest or recovery
Yeah.
as a tool emerged about 10,000 years ago. And it probably came from pastoralists or early crop farmers rotating their crops or moving their livestock to let the land recover. Now, that is a wonderful tool. It's the most powerful known to humans in oceans, lakes,
Yeah.
rivers, perennially humid environments. So all over Britain, that will produce great results. And it is producing great results. But the bulk of the world's land isn't like that. The rainfall in London and the rainfall in Johannesburg are about the same, but they're very different climates.
Sure.
Okay, so it doesn't matter what you do around London, you cannot cause desert. You can abuse the land, you can overgraze every plant, you can plow the land, you can put poisons on the land, and nature will recover and cover it up with vegetation of some sort. So resting the land is the most powerful tool known to humans. Now, if you go to New Mexico or Zimbabwe or the Sahel or many areas of China or South America or California or Nevada and the areas suffering mega fires right now as we talk,
Yeah.
if you go to those areas and you rest the land, as I showed in the TED Talk, even with government research plots, they turn to desert.
Right.
So the same tool of humans is extremely powerful where most of the universities are. And the people coming out of them believe in that.
Right.
And we scientists see the data that fits our beliefs. Now, if you look at the bulk of the world's land that is seasonal in rainfall nature, even though it's the same rainfall,
Yeah.
that same tool has the opposite effect. So
Okay.
that discovery flew in the face of human beliefs. And then the other, we got that in the 60s. We got amazing results, but incredible resistance from academics, because the biggest vested interest in the world, even greater than financial vested interests, is professional people's egos. So we got
Okay.
enormous, unbelievable resistance to that, which is still going on. And but we still weren't breaking through. We had success in 5 countries,
Yeah.
amazing improvement of the land, and then they all began to go backwards. And when I studied every case, because I was consulting and doing that in 5 countries, when I studied every case, I found the farmers and ranchers who were managing as I was developing were not at fault. I was at fault.
Right.
Found that what I'd done was I'd worked out how to manage the complexity of livestock, wildlife, plants, soil, etc., nature, but I
Right.
had not learned how to manage the complexity of culture, social behavior, and economics simultaneously. So it was back to the drawing board. And I actually then literally had to go right back to the drawing board, but by then I was in exile.
Yeah.
And then we were very lucky. There were Americans who were watching what I was doing because I was working with some American professors, and there was one university that was already plagiarizing the work. So when I started working into America, I avoided the plagiarization by just changing the name rather than fight one of the
Yeah.
biggest universities in America. I just changed the name. and carried on because I knew what they were doing wouldn't work. And there were two far-sighted people in the American USDA, US Department of Agriculture,
Yeah.
Don Sylvester and Ray Margot. And they came to me one day and said, look, everybody criticizes you, particularly our universities, but when we talk to ranchers who follow you, it's working. What are you doing that we don't understand?
Yeah.
Will you show us? And I said, willingly. I said, I'm trying to get this out to everybody, like open source.
Yeah.
And so they said, will you start providing some training for the Soil Conservation Service? And I said, no, not for just your service. It has to be open to everyone.
Everyone. Yeah.
So then they had discussions in Washington, D.C., came back to me and said, okay, we agree to open it to everyone. So we actually set up an interagency committee.
Right.
And we included World Bank, USAID, all the government agencies, Bureau of Indian Affairs, US Fish and Wildlife Service, every one of them. And we included all the agricultural universities, faculty
Right.
members. And we put 2,000 scientists and resource managers through training, a week of training, about 30 people at a time, over 2 years. And
Wow.
what we were doing was I was trying to train them on the management process I was trying to develop. So they helped me. It was the blind leading the blind in many ways. And it just an incredibly productive period. But every group worked out about the same.
Right.
As we began training, I would get everybody to introduce themselves. And Don and Ray and I and our whole interagency committee with forestry people on it, etc., would discuss them. And the same pattern emerged all over. When people introduced themselves, if they just said, I'm Jane Smith, I have a family, I have a dog, blah, 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 or whatever, or I work for the Bureau of Land Management, there would be no problem. They would learn, they would get enthusiastic,
Yeah.
and so on. If people introduced themselves and said, I am Dr. So-and-so, I am Professor of Range Science at Texas A&M University, or whatever, that was a red flag, because they had pinned their self-esteem to their status, their academic status, or their
Right.
public recognition. And when you expose people to new knowledge that goes against human beliefs, it's never changed since Galileo. You get intense resistance. New discoveries are new discoveries, and they're wonderful, and people make them all the time.
Yeah.
And any new discovery, if you study Lord Ashby's research or any of the social science work on this, any new discovery will go through a period of controversy, and then it'll be accepted at some point within a decade or so, all
Yeah.
right? And you get Nobel Prizes and awards and everything, and that's wonderful. But those are new discoveries. They do not go against, they were not known,
Yes,
but
they're completely innovative.
they did not go against 10,000 years of deep human belief. And
Yeah.
you can go back into ancient texts and see them blaming the nomads for causing the desert by overgrazing with their sheep and so on. These are deep beliefs that have assumed scientific validity. Right now, the second, what happened was when we were doing all that training, is it would end in a tremendous excitement and working together and working things out with the people who hadn't pinned their self-esteem
Yeah.
to their position, and with tremendous anger from the others that would disrupt training, etc.
Right.
But during that, we made an amazing breakthrough with the constructive people.
Right.
And we made the second breakthrough, because that's all we've done, or all I've done, is to come up with two simple ideas that go against thousands of years of belief. So the second one, and this is very pertinent to regenerative agriculture and the
Yeah.
whole survival of civilization, really, The second one was everybody listening to us, all right, and every scientist and person in the world believes we've got dozens and dozens of options. There are many ways of managing. You can
Mm.
manage dictatorially, scientifically, democratically, blah, blah, blah. There are universities that train in management. There are libraries full of management books. No, not true. All humans, when you manage something, at the end of the day, have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Without making decisions, no management occurs. And all humans make decisions exactly the same way. And it's the same way all tool-using animals make decisions. So I don't know you. I'm meeting you virtually for the first time.
Yes.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Haven't you made every conscious decision in your life this way? Now, I'm not talking of an unconscious decision. If your
No.
hand touches the stove, you'll pull it away. You won't make a decision. You'll pull it away. That's automatic. All
Yes.
right? Now, have you made every conscious decision in your life to meet a need or to meet a desire or to solve a problem?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah,
So is every
absolutely.
human.
As somebody who's a parent, and as someone who's worked in innovation, and as someone who is known as a problem solver, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, every human does. So does every government, and that is the cause of climate change right there.
Okay.
Now, why is that the cause? What we found was that management is the cause. It's not a scientific problem, it's a management problem.
Right.
All right. Now we've had years of denial
Yeah.
that humans were causing climate change, and we blamed coal, oil, fossil fuels, we
Yeah.
blamed livestock. That's why you've got all this artificial meat, and we need to do the things we do. So we blamed these resources. Some people blamed overpopulation, some,
Yeah.
blame all manner of things. If you think about it, in the last couple of years, almost every scientist has now acknowledged that humans are causing climate change. All right, now just use your common sense. If we are causing climate change,
Yeah.
then it has to be management.
Yes.
It has to be management and not resources. It is how you manage the coal. It is how you manage the oil. It is how you manage the livestock. The resources cannot cause a problem. Only the way you make management decisions causes the problem. So finally, unknowingly, scientists have acknowledged that there's one single cause of climate change, and it's not coal, it's not oil, it's not livestock, it's management.
And it's the management of those natural resources or
Well,
man-made resources.
let's look at what we manage. So when you look at what we manage, all right, we first think we manage thousands of things, millions of things. That's what our belief is. All right.
Yeah.
So we see that readily because we believe it. Well, let's look at it. We produce or make millions of things. We produce food from beef, grain, corn, vegetables, fruit, wine. We produce food.
Yes.
Okay. We produce art, literature, museums, music, orchestras. We produce everything from toothpicks to space exploration vehicles. Everything in the room around you is made or produced.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, so we make or produce millions of things. We do not manage them. We make or produce them.
Yes.
If you stop producing food, it stops. If you stop making motor cars, they stop. If a part is missing, they stop. If they run out of fuel or a battery, they stop. Nothing we make or produce is self-organizing.
No.
So nothing we make or produce is complex. They are defined in system science as complicated. And they are. I can't even make a pen like this. I
Yes.
can't Yes.
because the number of parts and the supply chain and
Correct.
the raw materials.
Okay, so we make or produce millions of things, including our food.
Mm,
That's not where the problem lies, because we don't manage those. So what if we look at the things we manage, we find a different picture. The
mm,
things we manage are only three.
okay.
We manage humans. You manage your family, your life, and we manage institutions, because everything we do at large scale has to be done through a company, a group of people, an
Yes.
organization, a university, a government, an environmental organization, a cattle people's organization, or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so we manage humans and institutions, and through those we manage economies.
Hmm.
So we manage economies, and through managing institutions and economies, we manage nature to produce everything we produce, because
Yes.
everything we produce basically comes from nature and goes back to nature.
Hmm.
All right, so we're only actually managing three things, and when we look at them, you cannot manage them independent of one another. If you look at the things we produce, you can produce corn or beef. You can produce cheese or wine. You can produce cars or planes. You can produce television sets or bombs. You can
Yes.
choose. When you look at the three things humans manage, you can't choose.
Because
You have to manage them together.
they're
You
interconnected.
cannot manage nature without managing human institutions at scale and economies. They're
Yes.
indivisible. So we discovered that in 1984, approximately, 83. That was an amazing discovery.
And how did
But
that
it
go
went,
down?
but it went against thousands of years and current human beliefs of everyone.
But the way you've just articulated that to somebody, I would like to think of relatively good intelligence, would go, but that makes sense. For many years, I've sat there and thought through people, religion, and money, there seemed to be this kind of destructive tool that creates wars and greed and poor decision making. So for me, that makes sense.
All right, it does. Now let's take what you said there, religion. Um, the if you just we'll just look at one religion. I'm not religious, by the way. If we look at one religion, Christianity, which I was brought up in,
Hmm.
the message of Christ was very simple: love and caring, and millions of humans love and care.
Yes.
And this comes out in times of hardship. The harder the times are, the more the poor give, the less
Yes.
the wealthy give. So most people are good, most people are doing their best. And so the moment we managed religion at scale, we did it through organizations, institutions. The moment religions turned to institutions to be managed at scale, what happened? We now have over 1,600 Christian organizations. And for centuries, they've been killing, torturing, maiming each other, Protestants versus Catholics, etc.
Mm.
Uh, you have millions of wonderful Catholics, wonderful people
Yeah.
who love and care for their children. The moment we institutionalized that and it became the Catholic Church, how many centuries did they know about pedophile priests? And what did they do?
Many, many, many
No.
years.
The moment you form an institution, remember it is a complex organization. It's not something you produce, it's something you manage. And it's complexity. And you
So,
look at economies, most economists are good, they're doing their best. But global finance today is driving human environmental destruction. So you begin to
100%.
get totally different result things. So what what we learned then gradually began to help understand why the intense resistance to simple common sense. Because there are three things that researchers discovered in system science about institutions.
Yes.
And when you have all the things we produce, when problems occur in system science, they are called kind problems. That
Okay.
means we can solve them relatively easily. We try to put a rocket into space, it bursts, a couple of people get killed, give us a few $1 million, give us a year, we're back on track.
Yeah.
Okay, we have desertification, more than 20 civilizations fail, we cannot solve it, it's now globally out of control. Why couldn't we solve that problem? It's a far simpler problem.
Yeah.
It took us 10,000 years to find the solution, and then intense resistance to the solution. Right? So this is because the moment we form an institution, it does not behave like a human being. So you and I and everybody listening, even when they are part of an institution, are
Mm.
capable of common sense. A
Yes.
human is capable of common sense. An institution is almost incapable. Now,
Because
if
it
you
believes in whatever or whatever it's
no, no,
surrounded by, or
no, just common sense.
mm.
Just common sense. So look at an example. If you were to come here and ask almost anybody in America, a child, a gardener, a fisherman, a nurse, almost anybody, does it make sense for America to produce oil and from that to produce corn and from that to produce fuel for vehicles?
No.
No, it's stupid.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of brilliant American scientists, many companies are doing it. How
Mm.
many are protesting? How many are saying this isn't common sense?
I don't hear anything.
Yeah. Now, the second thing that institutions do, all right, is the one we were talking about a moment ago. It's easy, relatively easy, for an individual, as I did in the TED talk, to say, I screwed up.
Yeah.
My research led to killing 40,000 elephants, and the situation got worse. We were wrong. I was wrong.
Yeah.
Not a single other person or institution has yet admitted error. They're still talking about wanting to cull.
Which is a simple human empowering act to admit when you're wrong.
Correct, but an institution almost cannot.
No.
It's incredibly difficult to think of any case where a church or any organization, a cattlemen's organization or an environmental organization, will admit to error. They circle the wagons and they protect the organization
Yeah.
even when they're going against their very purpose. So let's look at a wonderful British organization, World Wildlife Fund.
Mm.
Okay, that's a great organization. Millions of people fund it and support it. 35 years ago, roughly, Dr. Ivan Hatting, he was at university with me. He was high in World Wildlife Fund at Godalming.
Right.
And Ivan, knowing me, knowing the work I was doing, invited me to come to London and speak at World Wildlife headquarters at Godalming. So I traveled to London. Ivan met me, drove me out there. We went around the building, met great people, lovely people, really caring about wildlife. We went to the room where the projector was set up for me to talk to them, and they boycotted the lecture. Not one would attend. So I spoke to Ivan and 6 people who came in from the street.
Wow.
And today, if you look at the work of World Wildlife Fund and the wonderful people in Britain who care about wildlife, Prince William now entering that arena and so on,
Yeah.
if you look at them, if you look at national parks, which is how we're trying to preserve wildlife, if you look at national parks in humid environments or ocean environments, as
Mm.
we talked of earlier, if you rest them or conserve or rewild, the biodiversity recovers. If you come to where I live at the Victoria Falls, and I'll be leaving for there tomorrow,
Yeah.
right, I'm surrounded by more than 30 national parks in Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. All right. Now, there, our national parks are our worst examples of terrible biodiversity loss. We're losing God knows how many species,
Yeah.
bare ground, it's terrible destruction. Trees hundreds of years old are dying now, not being replaced. Whole
Mm.
reed beds are disappearing. All the birds, things associated with them are disappearing. They are our worst examples of biodiversity loss, habitat destruction, desertification, and contribution to climate change.
But
What
in
is
their
the,
sense, they're national parks.
correct. Now, what is the World Wildlife Fund doing about it?
I don't know.
They won't even discuss it with me because they've got to defend the organization, not wildlife. And they're good people. They're not being bad. It's how institutions function. And we have to manage at scale through institutions.
So how do we, as I mean, this might sound controversial, but if institutions seem to be as as good at doing what they think they're doing, is there a way of institutionalizing desertification in its very form so that people think take your learnings and your recommendations, can't you institutionalize that
Well,
so that it then
this is wonderful. We have to because we can only manage at scale through institutions. So we have to solve this problem. Now, I've mentioned two of what are called wicked problems. That doesn't mean they're evil problems, it means they're almost impossible to solve. Nobody has solved them in the last 10, 20,000 years.
yeah.
The third one I didn't mention yet, but we were talking about it indirectly, is institutions reflect the prevailing views of society in which they're formed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go, and we need institutions because they're our most efficient way of working. You cannot win a war as individuals. You have to have armies, you have to have political leaders, etc. You cannot run a country as individuals,
Yeah.
right? So we need our institutions. They are our most efficient way of managing at large scale.
Right.
However, they reflect the prevailing views of society. So if anything emerges, a new discovery, anything new, they will support it. So if you go into an institution, you will always find them with the leading technology, the latest cell phones, computers, software, you name it,
Mm.
because society believes in technology. Society believes in planting trees. So institutions are planting millions of trees in China and all over. A woman in Kenya was given a Nobel Prize for planting trees
Yeah.
because society believes in it, institutions believe in it. Trees have no hope whatsoever of stopping desertification
No.
because you're using technology to plant plants. It doesn't matter whether you plant grass or trees, you're not addressing the cause of desertification, which is the management.
Right.
You see? So institutions then lead the way with anything that society believes in. Now, the moment you come up with, as I unfortunately did, two discoveries that go against thousands of years of societal belief, institutions lead the ridicule and opposition.
Right.
So the very first people in an ideal world, or the very first institutions that should have picked up, like Ivan Hatting did as an individual, on the work that we were doing in Africa and then later in America,
Mm.
should have been environmental organizations, agricultural organizations, cattlemen's organizations. No, to this day, as we speak now, not a single environmental or cattlemen's organization or agricultural organization has ever done anything except oppose what I'm saying. Because
So,
that's a wicked problem. So if you look at Semmelweis, he made a major discovery that is a little bit between. Didn't go against everything we believed, but it went against what professional people believed. And he discovered virtually bacteria before we knew they existed by
mm.
realizing that if he washed his hands after cutting up corpses before he went to the maternity wards, he saved hundreds of women's lives.
Right.
Now, that was so ridiculed that he died in a mental asylum.
Like I honestly, just hearing you say that, I know things were different back then, but that's ridiculous.
But that's how institutions are. They are not, they don't behave like a human being does. And that we need to understand. So we need institutions. They're our most efficient way of doing things. We cannot do without them, but we need to acknowledge that they have three wicked problems.
Mm.
Now, researchers know that, and then, like Sir Frank Fraser-Darling said to me, Alan, you'll just become a researcher, do your research, and not worry what is done with it. The researchers who discovered that weren't me,
No.
but they don't do anything to follow it up. They just publish their papers, and that's it. No, we as humans need to follow up some of the stuff. So, being constructive, let's come to regenerative agriculture now.
Mm.
We, without we said we're facing this terrible problem: global desertification, mega fires, and climate change spiraling out of control. They're one
Mm.
and the same. They have the same cause: human decision making at scale through institutions. That's
Yeah.
all that is causing them. Right now, in that situation, we're blaming fossil fuels mostly and
Yeah.
livestock, right? And most people are talking about sequestering carbon and blah, 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 right? Not many are talking about agriculture. In 25 conferences on climate change, nothing came out except confusion and blaming coal and oil primarily.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you think about it, and everybody listening to us thinks about it, and individuals are going to have to start using common sense. Without agriculture, you cannot have an orchestra, you cannot
Hmm.
have a choir, you cannot have a school, you cannot have a government, a university, you cannot have a town, you cannot have a city, you cannot have an army, you cannot have a political party, you cannot have any business in the world. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization.
Because
Now,
it's food.
today, because of institutional management, agriculture is the most destructive industry ever in the history of the world. And it's hardly even discussed at climate change conferences. Right, so we've got to focus on agriculture and our management of fossil fuels, etc. And we have to do through that through institutions. And one of the good places to start, we could start, if we could get the world to do it, by just focusing on national parks so that
Right.
everybody learned. I've tried that and I can't generate enough interest. People just support the institutions and the situation. So if we try to look at agriculture, right, there we could begin to do it by getting a country
Yeah.
somewhere to look at agricultural policy. Now, we talked earlier about what is causing the problem,
Mm.
and I said it is the way we make decisions in management.
Hmm.
And I said, all of us humans, the reason for our decisions is to meet a need, a desire, or to address a problem. Policy in governments is to do the same, generally to address a problem.
Yes.
Now, how do governments do it? How does your government in the UK do it? They do it the same way. And I had to become president of a political party with my shadow cabinet, developing policy in education, defense, agriculture, mining, blah, 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 to realize, oh my God, all governments do this the same way, whether they're dictators or democracies, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
How do they do it? They do it with the reason for the policy being the problem, maybe it's agriculture or climate
Hmm.
change or whatever, and the politicians who have to develop the policy, the world leaders, they develop the policy bombarded by different opinions of experts.
Yes.
And pressure groups and vested interest groups. And the political leaders have to tread through that minefield and come up with some sort of compromise policy. It isn't working.
No.
The war on drugs, increased drug use. The war on terror is increasing terror. The climate change is accelerating. The war on desertification, it's accelerating. It doesn't work because you cannot take the social, cultural complexity, the environmental, nature's complexity, economic complexity that are indivisible. You cannot take them and reduce that to meeting a need, a desire, or solving a problem to develop a policy. That is reductionist management. That
Right.
is the cause of the problem. All right, so what I'm trying to do now is to recognize that perhaps countries like Britain and Germany and France and America are too large. They're too cumbersome. It's like having an aircraft carrier and a paddle in your hand at the back trying to steer it.
Yes.
So I'm looking for a small country, or a small country with an autocratic government, or in deep trouble, where it's a little bit more like steering a canoe. And if we can get one country to simply develop policy holistically, it'll show the world what could be done and hopefully start a domino effect. Because not a single political leader in the world knows what to do. That I can guarantee. They're just getting confusing advice and conflict that they have to try and steer through.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get one government to change now. If that happened, I think it could start a domino effect. Yeah. Now,
So,
what we would do there is simply to develop policy in a different way. If you look at, I'm looking at one country now, and I won't actually name them right at the moment because
no.
I'm right in discussion with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Agriculture at the moment. But if we look at a country like that, it's typical of all. The Prime Minister is expected to develop, say, an agricultural policy. How will he do it? He'll do it on the basis of the advice of experts and pressure groups with his ministers or her ministers and cabinet, and they will come up with a policy. It will lead to unintended results and so on. So
Yeah.
how do we avoid that? Because there wasn't a lack of knowledge. It's not a scientific problem, it's a management problem. We avoid it by avoiding the reductionist management. So instead of having experts fighting and arguing and offending each other and trying to get their view to prevail and pressure groups and so on, you don't start with a problem. How can you possibly start with a problem and reduce that complexity of that nation to a problem? So you don't start there. You start by just saying, who is affected by this policy? Well, if it's agriculture, it's everybody. It's the captains of industry, it's the women's organizations, the church groups, every business, and so on. All right, let's get representatives of these together, and let's first agree on a context for the decision. Having a reason for a decision isn't the same as having a context. At the moment, people confuse the two. So if it was you and I, and some others listening to us, and you were eager to push forward your solution for how agriculture should be, and I was eager to push mine forward, and others were, all we would do is end in conflict and discussion and argument. So if I was facilitating this, I would say, let's not discuss the problem at all.
Yes.
Let's first discuss, how do we want our lives to be? Because that's why we're managing. How do we want, based on our culture, our lives to be? We want clean food, clean air, good education, freedom to pursue our own spiritual beliefs, etc., etc., whatever it is for our culture. Now, if that's the lives we want for our people, all of us together, no compromise, because everybody's wanting the same, except for the odd crazy person, everybody's wanting the same thing. Right? Now, if that's the case, then let's forget how bad our land is at the moment. I mean, some of Britain's farming is terrible,
Yeah.
terrible.
Hmm.
Don't discuss it because you'll just get into argument. So if this is the way we want our lives to be, then what will our environment, our habitat,
Need to
human
be.
habitat, have to be like 500 years from now for people to live a life like this and be able to explore space and all the things humans want to do from a
Yeah.
secure base? What will that have to look like? Now, don't describe it by species. We describe the environment by process, effective rainfall, most water soaking into the soil, not running off and causing floods as you're getting in Europe, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? High biodiversity, complexity, stability, etc. We don't mention species because we don't know what those species will be, but we do need a functioning environment, whether it's ocean or land. They all
Yes.
function the same way. Okay, so we describe that as it'll have to be far into the future. And then we've got another thing to describe. We need people to support us. Politicians need people to support them when they have the policy. I can't make you support me.
Yeah.
I can't make you trust me. I can only be trustworthy. So we, developing this policy as this context for policy, how are we going to have to be? At the
Yes.
end of the day, we're not judged by our brands, our logos, our bullshit, our words. We're
Yeah.
judged by our behavior. So we describe now how we will have to behave. And now we have this concept of a holistic context, and there
Yes.
can be no compromise. If you compromise, neither party is happy. You have to keep discussing it until you have agreement, and it's amazingly easy to get agreement if you
Yeah.
do this properly. Right? Now we have a context. Now that concept of a holistic context for all decisions and policies tragically is a new concept. It's not in any religion in the world. It's not in any branch of science in the world. It's not in any philosophy in the world. It was a new concept we came up with and finally discovered in 1983.
Hmm.
And it's that simple. Now, when we do that, and we've got that, then if we were developing policy, now we can listen to our experts. Now we can listen to our pressure groups. Now we can listen to ordinary farmers who are some of the most creative people in the world. They made civilization possible centuries before we had the first scientist.
Yes, of course.
Okay? So now we can listen to all this and not tell anybody they're wrong. If I tell you your idea is wrong, what's your reaction? It's offense.
I'll prove you
So,
wrong.
so when we're managing holistically, we never tell somebody they're wrong because you don't know if they're wrong or right till you have a context. If you only have a reason for a decision, you don't know. So now we can listen to each other, and if you or I put forward an idea as to how agriculture could function in that context, and our idea is wrong, when we use this process that's explained in my textbook,
Yeah.
it's a third edition, when we use that, we've got some filters, a series of filters to just check. So you make a suggestion, we say, okay, that sounds a good idea. We
Hmm.
don't know yet. And now together we go through those filters and we look at it and see if it's socially, culturally, environmentally, and economically sound, short term and long term. And
Yes.
if it is, we put that idea, okay, that's a potential idea to be in the policy. And then if you put forward another idea and we do that filtering, nobody tells you you're wrong, you discover it's wrong.
And I
You
think that's,
discover it's not in context. And this
hmm.
way, it's relatively easy to develop policy.
And I think
Far
that's
easier
probably
than
what
we
the,
do today.
yeah, and I think that's potentially what the challenge is. It's either seen as too big and complex, or there's no way, if I get this wrong, that's the end of my career, that, but there's not many people who will stand up and say, do you know what, I got that wrong, but if we did this, this and this is how we could evolve the idea.
Well, you're right, and now we face the situation where literally we're at a crossroads, and I am putting so much concern and worry. I'll be 86 next month, I think. So
You
I've only got
think?
a few years left. I'm running on batteries and spare parts, and thank God for technology. Okay, it's wonderful, and I think, what can I do? I've spent my whole life trying to solve this problem. We've had this intense resistance and confusion. There are millions of people now mimicking my words and saying we have to mimic nature, we have to mob graze, we have to get animals together, blah, blah, blah. You know, as Kipling said, if you can to hear the words you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, they're not doing it deliberately. That's how knowledge spreads, but it's awfully
Of course.
confusing. So I'm trying to think to myself, we've only got two options now. I really believe this.
Okay.
So I hope everybody will listen carefully. We can continue as we are now. And Lord Ashby's research, you can read his book, Reconciling Man and the Environment. He found, looking at Britain and America over the last 200 years, how new knowledge gets into society, democratic society. And he found it cannot be brought in through your institutions, your politicians, your leaders, etc. Politicians can only lead at war. Otherwise, they can't really lead.
Right.
And so, looking at that, we can go on incrementally advancing and changing. And there's a couple of conferences going on right now
Yeah.
on food sustainability. I will promise you, and you'll see whether I'm right or wrong, I'll promise you right now, nothing will come out of it except confusion. There will be no change. Because just like there have been 25 conferences on climate change, there have been endless conferences on desertification and the symptoms of desertification, poverty, violence, spreading immigration to Europe, endless conferences. There'll be no solution because they're not discussing the cause. So, but we can continue like that and make incremental change, and it'll be just like the Royal Navy that took 200 years to accept that lime juice would stop scurvy. A million sailors had to die. Britain was totally dependent on the Navy. It took the merchant Navy another 70 years to accept it. Brilliant people. Okay, that's how new knowledge spreads slowly until institutions accept it. So that's our one option. It'll take, I've been 50 years on it already and made almost no progress. So we can reckon on at least another 100 years until what I'm saying is looked at seriously by any institution.
Yeah.
Okay? I don't think the youth have got that time.
No.
Okay, so that's our one option, and it's the only known way of change. So the other option that I'm suggesting is the one I mentioned just now, and that's the one I'm concentrating on. Trying to get one government somewhere to just carry on governing as expected, for the leader of that government to take no political risk. The public expect you to listen to expert advice and pressure groups and develop policy. Do it. Don't take any risk. Simultaneously, concurrently though, set up a one-day retreat, which I will facilitate, and let us bring your experts together and just show them how policy could be developed holistically.
Yes.
In a national, holistic context with the whole nation behind it. Because something like agriculture should have nothing to do with politics.
Okay.
There's no way that politics has any role in agriculture, which is the basis of foundation of civilization.
Okay.
So if they do that, they can then see how easy it is to do. That nation can then make a decision to either do that and let us facilitate the whole nation developing a policy in that way. And I promise you, because we've done this so often in mock exercises and training
Yeah.
exercises with real people, that it's actually easier than present policy development. And at the end of that, they can say, all right, we can carry on with our policy as is, or we can look at this policy developed by the same experts in a different way and accept that.
Yeah.
Now, if that is done, it's never been done in the history of the world. If that is done totally risk-free, no downside, except if I'm wrong, we waste a year
Yeah.
and a few $1,000s. If I'm right, you can't put a price on it.
No.
Actually, a fellow summed that up well. Jim Tear, Professor Jim Tear.
Jim
He,
Tier.
unfortunately, Jim's dead now. I never worked with him, but he was a very respected professor at Texas A&M University, and he was wandering on the land with me in Texas in about 1981, I think it was. And Jim said to me at one point, he said, Alan, either you are wrong and we will not be able to dig a hole deep enough to bury you in. He said, or you're right, and the world will not be able to build a monument high enough. And I said, Jim, it's not about me. It's not about our goddamned egos. It's about trying to save civilization. What do you think? And he said, Alan, I'm sitting on the fence. And he died sitting on the fence. I don't think we can go on sitting on the fence. I think we have to either show that I'm wrong, destroy me completely politically, I don't give a damn,
Yeah.
or see that it works and how simple it is and move on.
Yes. I think, for someone like me who can one day feel so very overwhelmed by it all because of the complexities, but also realizes and is very sick and tired of, we've got another, COP26 coming up in a couple of months. You just kind of sit there thinking it's going to be more words, very little action. And it will be a little bit unashamedly like COVID. Yes, we found a solution, but we're still, there are still countries that have got millions and millions of vaccines and others that haven't. And that's not, whilst the world came together in science to find a vaccine, I'm sitting here going, why the hell can't the world come together and find a solution for what we need for civilization? And that's the bit that I don't know what I'm going to do for my daughters. I don't know how they're going to get through it. The answers are there. The intelligence is there. The amazing people is there. Why the bloody hell are we not doing something about it? I don't get it.
Well, I hope I've explained it to you.
You
We're not
have.
doing anything because of institutional wicked problems that nobody's looking into. There's
Yeah.
no good investigative reporting. You've got papers like The Guardian that I used to respect. I've lost all respect. They do no investigative reporting
No.
at all. They could easily investigate this. You take even, you are absolutely right. The conferences that are going on at the moment, the next one on climate, the one TED people are running on climate,
Yeah.
the ones on agriculture. I promise you, I'll stake my life on it for the reasons I've explained in this talk. They
Yeah.
will come up with nothing. And if you even look at TED, Chris Anderson at TED, he took a great risk. He allowed me to talk at TED. I gave that talk that's actually been seen by nearly 8 million people officially. It's way over that because often 100 people or 30 people look at it together.
Yeah.
Some people have said it's the most meaningful TED talk ever, but I can't even correspond with them now. They won't answer emails or anything. They were so criticized for even allowing me to talk.
But again, unless I'm completely missing the obvious, one of the things that I really value in life is having people in the absolute opposite direction of me with their views and thoughts and processes. And as someone who goes, why not try it? because for me, that's the way, until you prove, until you can categorically prove that that person or process is wrong, it's kind of just talk. And as you've said, what's really exciting, and I hope that you do get this away in this particular country that you're talking to, is we don't have to change everything that they're doing, but by just once and for all proving it whilst you're still here, is most critical. Because it's not as if you're going to say, I told you so. It's a case of, great, now let's get on with it. Surely.
Well, you're using common sense, and that's the problem. That institutions can't. In a country like the UK, where you are, and I'm speaking as a politician now, having gone into, politics to try to solve this problem. Your democracy is so old and so traditional in how it goes that the best way to do it would be just parliamentary inquiry into the cause of climate change, because nobody's even talking about the cause. They're just blaming fossil fuels. So if you had a parliamentary inquiry, now some years ago, you did have an all-party conference in the House of Lords, and I went over to be there, and Lord Cameron chaired it, and I was very distressed. It was on agriculture, and Lord Cameron began his opening remarks were that agriculture wasn't very sexy in the British Parliament. God damn it, agriculture is the whole basis of civilization. And he opened it with that remark, and we got nowhere with it. It was just a waste of time. But if you had a parliamentary inquiry into the cause of it, or if you had good investigative reporting by the press, anything that brings out to the public why common sense isn't prevailing.
Yeah.
Because please believe me, almost everybody is good. Most people are good. They mean well. They're doing their best. What we didn't know was that we were making management decisions in a reductionist way. We didn't know that. So it's like, I don't blame any individual. I criticize how institutions behave. But you will notice I never blame an individual, because individuals are not responsible. Look at the religious example we used, okay? So what we need is good investigative reporting. It just isn't existing at the moment with any of the press. They're not doing anything except regurgitate academic opinions.
Yeah.
So that would help. Or in a country like America or Britain, good congressional inquiry or parliamentary inquiry into the cause, not the things we blame. And, just a certain amount of public opinion could bring that about. Yeah. I know that if I was a member of parliament there, I could bring it about.
Maybe that's what I should do. Maybe I should make that a mission, potentially, in terms of the cause, because I think when you see, feel and hear the governments and what you see in the press, deep down, whether you've gone through a tragedy with somebody and the real truth, it's never presented in the right way. There's never that kind of 30 sides to a story. But do things like Seaspiracy, Cowspiracy, that sort of investigative, do we need more of that, or do you think that goes too far to the extreme?
What were you mentioning, Cowspiracy?
Yes.
Well, that wasn't investigative reporting at all.
No.
That was just straight out propaganda.
Yeah. But it's those things that...
You see, that was produced by people who totally believe that cattle are evil. Just like I did when I was 20-year-old. I was on public record in Rhodesia saying I was prepared to shoot goddamn ranchers because their cattle were destroying the land. I then discovered I was wrong. And I went around the whole country saying I was wrong. We've got to use these livestock, and then I had to work out how. But so that Cowspiracy was just rubbish. It was produced by people who are antagonistic, like the vegan stuff. There's nothing wrong with people being vegans if they believe it for their health reasons.
Yeah.
Everyone should have the right to do so. But I put out a blog that if vegans are doing it for environmental reasons or for ethical reasons, then unfortunately they're doing damage.
Mm. Yeah, and as you say, in the back of my mind, I can hear certain people or colleagues or friends and what their immediate response would be. And yeah, I guess I just very much hope that,
But Rhonda, can I interrupt you there?
of
Because it's a
course,
good teaching moment. Do you see what you're doing? You're thinking of, if somebody put this idea forward or that idea forward, what would their response be? It'll be conflict.
yeah,
That's the point I'm making. So if for example, you were to put this forward, don't promote what I'm saying about grazing or livestock or any of these things, because other people will have contrary views. And we haven't got a context yet. We only
yes,
have a reason for what we're doing. So that's why I would appeal to you and everybody listening, don't support anything I'm saying except to get one small country or one country somewhere to just, in a risk-free manner, do this on the side and see what can be done,
mm,
or get proper investigative reporting where people don't support what I'm doing, destroy what I'm saying. I don't mind.
but do it in
Just,
an investigative way.
just investigate properly.
Yeah,
Don't favor me or anybody else. It's like Jim Tier said, Professor Tier, either you're wrong or you're right. If you're wrong, it's terrible. If you're right, you, we, what price do you put on saving humanity?
I, I have no answer for that.
Yeah.
I I think what I will really take away from this, and I appreciate we've been chatting now for quite some time, but one thing that I'll really take away from this is that vision of what humanity, civilization could look like. And I think that's the point that we miss a lot. It's the vision of heaven versus hell, which is constantly what is replayed and what we see and hear. So just imagine that picture that you draw of what our children's children will be living in. That's the bit that I think has a real sense of hope and opportunity. And I do very much hope, Alan, that you will get given that chance with, I don't know which country you're talking to, but I know, the likes of Georgia and Costa Rica, and there's lots of countries who really want to be the world first. So I just hope you can connect the dots.
Well, any small country could do it. I'm talking to people in Scotland. I've talked to people in Ireland, in Uruguay, in New Zealand, in Zimbabwe. If we can get one small country to move, or in a big country, if we can get proper congressional inquiry, things will begin to move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Alan, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And if anybody obviously wants to know anything about the Savory Institute, they can go and find that out online. And of course, there's the book, Holistic Management, A Commonsense Revolution, to Restore Our Environment. And is there any other places or tags that people can go and find out more if they want to, Alan?
Yeah, and they've got a hub in the UK. We've got more than 50 hubs on 6 continents where people are getting together and helping each other and beginning to manage through the Savory Institute. That's all part of the amazing incremental change they're making, and is wonderful. But I'm trying to spend my remaining years
Yeah.
on a breakthrough, bring the Berlin Wall down.
And
Otherwise, our kids have little hope.
no. And actually, if we took out all of the buzzwords that you say, and actually we presented your philosophy and theory as just ways to do business, ways to be alive, ways to enjoy, I think I just pray that in the next few years, while you've got the power and the energy and the passion, that will happen. So thank you so much, Alan, for your time. It's been absolutely incredible, and I'm blessed to have been able to talk to you.
Well, thank you for your effort in helping get the word out. And by the way, it's no philosophy, no theory. It's 100%, it's 100% practical, like riding a bicycle. if you had never seen a bicycle in your life, and I was trying to describe to you how to ride a bicycle, the more I described, the more confusing it would get. Okay?
Yes.
That's why I want to work with one country's government and just show them how to ride the bicycle. Because if I was with you and showed you how this works, you would get it immediately, same as with a bicycle. And incidentally, you mentioned your daughters. My youngest daughter is now teaching kids environmental literacy, ecological literacy, and decision making. And from 7 to 9 years old, the kids are amazingly open. They get it immediately because it's just such common sense.
Yes.
And there are only two things I've ever found block learning, and one isn't ignorance. I've never seen ignorance block learning.
Yeah.
All that blocks us learning is what we already know and are certain about, or our egos. There's nothing else that blocks learning. And we adults know so much and we have such egos, and we're endangering our kids.
No, you're right. And yeah, great place to end. And yeah, once again, thank you so much, Allan, and obviously have a super safe trip back over to Zimbabwe.
Well, thank you, Rona.
So that's it. You've made it. The show's over. Thank you for being with us. I hope you've been able to take something away, maybe solve a problem, or just know you're not alone. Here's hoping it made you smile with a few laughs along the way. Please feel free to find me on all social media channels, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search the Rona Morel podcast. Have an awesome day and see you next time.